My name is Luna, and I never imagined the betrayal would start so quietly. I remember the first time I saw him slouching on my sister's couch. She introduced us in that gentle, lilting tone she always reserves for people she adores. I managed to mumble a greeting, but my heart was pounding like a drum, and my fingertips felt numb against the fabric of my dress. I forced my smile, though my jaw clenched so tightly I could taste grit on my teeth. My sister beamed, unaware of how my chest grew tight, like a noose slowly pulling. He spoke softly, with that practiced calm, and I felt a flicker of unease I couldn't name. It was odd. He laughed too easily, leaned in too close, whispered compliments that felt rehearsed. My palms sweated against the wine glass, and I pretended to study the petals on the coffee table instead of his watchful eyes. My sister's laughter echoed through the room, bright and trusting, as though she saw only sunshine in him. Over the next few weeks, I noticed small things that made my throat tighten. He'd show up unannounced, saying my sister had called him, though neither of them mentioned it to me. I'd find his jacket lingering on the banister, like a snake waiting to strike. When I asked him about it, he'd offer that easy smile and shrug so casually that I almost let it slide, almost. But there was something in the way his lips curved, something that felt like a promise to take more than he gave. I tried to chalk it up to sisterly protectiveness, me, the older one, always watching, always worrying. But deep down, I sensed a pattern. Doors I thought locked at night would stand ajar. I'd pause at the threshold of my own bedroom and feel a shiver, as though someone was inside waiting. My pulse would spike, and I'd press my ear to the wood, half hoping to hear breathing. But there was only silence, save the soft hum of the house settling. My sister called one evening and asked me to babysit her cat. She sounded rushed, distracted. Her voice trembled just a bit, though she laughed it off. I told her fine, and I'd stop by that night. When I arrived, the front door swung open before I could knock, and there he stood, brushing his hands on his jeans, eyes drifting past me. "Hey," he said, like this was his place to welcome guests. I frowned, and he shifted. "She asked me to get here early." I nodded, but inside, my jaw locked, and the air felt thick. I wandered through the rooms, noticing how he'd rearranged pictures on the walls, my family, my childhood memories, so they faced away, hidden. I could feel my throat constrict, like I was drowning in the rooms I thought were mine. He followed behind, footsteps silent, and I kept glancing back, my hands flexing at my sides. He spoke softly about my sister's long day at work, about how she'd appreciate the surprise. But his words dripped with something cold, measured, and I felt a jolt of pure panic. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my bed, teeth clenching, staring at the ceiling. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would burst. I pictured him alone in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows on his face. I imagined him rifling through my things, slipping into my clothes. My hands trembled on the sheets, and a wave of horror rolled over me, as sharp as broken glass. I forced myself up, every muscle trembling, and checked every room, every door latched, every window locked. I kept quiet, though, because my sister trusted him. She said he was different, kind. She said I was being dramatic. She said I was jealous. And so I smiled, and nodded, and swallowed the knot in my throat, even as I felt the walls closing in. I watched him move through my life like a dark tide, slipping into every corner, claiming every inch. And I wondered, with a pit in my gut, how far he would go before I finally saw him for who he really was. I woke the next morning to the soft clink of a mug on the kitchen counter and the low murmur of his voice. My sister was laughing, light, unaware, while he stirred her coffee. I paused in the hallway, heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. His silhouette bent over her mug, casual and unhurried, looked for all the world like he owned every inch of the place. I stepped in as if by accident, forcing my shoulders to relax and my voice to stay even. "Morning," I said, throat scratchy. He glanced up with that practiced smile, warm, attentive, like a spotlight trained on my sister. My sister waved a hand, eyes bright. "Hey, Luna," she chirped. "He made me coffee. Isn't that sweet?" Sweet. The word twisted in my gut. He set the mug in front of her and brushed a stray lock from her face. My palms went slick. I pressed one against the doorframe to keep from sliding to the floor. I managed a nod and turned away, mouth dry. I told myself it was fine, she liked that kind of attention. But inside, I felt something shift. In the living room later, I found his coat draped over my favorite armchair, the fabric still warm. My chest tightened as I lifted it off and shook it free, letting it drop to the floor with a soft thud. I glanced around, imagining him in that chair, leaning back with his feet up. The thought made my skin crawl. I closed my eyes, pressing my knuckles to my lips, tasting salt. I busied myself with cleaning up breakfast dishes, every plate and spoon a reminder that my kitchen was no longer just mine. He slipped in behind me, smooth footsteps on the tile. She mentioned you were worried, he said, voice low. I stiffened, shoulders lifting. I started, then stopped, swallowing against the lump. He watched me, eyes kind but unreadable, waiting for me to finish. I took a breath. I'm fine, I said too quickly. He gave a slow nod and drifted away. All day, I moved through the house like a ghost. I peeked into rooms he'd rearranged, long-forgotten photo albums now shoved face down on shelves, my cushions fluffed and resting where I never put them. My throat felt raw, every breath a jagged shard. I kept replaying that morning, the sight of him leaning over my sister's mug, the way my pulse had spiked like a warning alarm. By afternoon, the tension in my shoulders had settled into a dull ache. I found myself in the study, rifling through a stack of papers that felt unfamiliar, bills in my sister's name for services we never ordered, framed photos replaced with travel postcards for a trip we'd never take. I squeezed my eyes shut, taking in a shuddering breath that rattled my chest. When I opened them again, I began snapping photos, every receipt, every note, every postcard. My hands trembled, but I clicked until my phone ran out of space. I slipped out of the study, the weight of each photo a prism in my pocket. My sister was on a call in the living room, her laughter easy, her back turned. He hovered nearby, leaning against the doorway, arms crossed casually. I felt a flash of irritation sharpen into resolve. I stepped closer. Hey, I said, voice low. My sister ended her call and swiveled to me with that bright smile. Everything okay? She asked, genuine concern in her tone. I forced a nod and heard my voice catch. Just collecting some things for taxes. I offered a weak smile. He moved off first, melting back into the shadows of the hallway. My sister narrowed her eyes at me. What's going on? She pressed. My chest felt hot. I held her gaze for a moment, weighing her trust against the fear twisting my stomach. Nothing, I said, voice small. Just stuff to sort. Her brow furrowed, but she let it go. That evening, I couldn't stand it any longer. I slipped out into the yard and paced under the dim porch light, phone clutched tight. I scrolled through the photos, each one a tremor in my gut. I tapped out a quick message to my friend, can I come over tonight? Something's going on and I need you. I hit send before I could hesitate. I came back through the door to find them sitting together on the couch, her hand on his knee. My breath hitched. The lamp threw their shadows in long shapes across the rug, intertwined. I froze, the hallway narrowing into a tunnel of panic. He turned, eyes glinting, and my sister looked alarmed. I clenched my fists at my sides, nails digging into my palms until they bled. I swallowed, jaw locked, and forced myself to speak. I'm going out, I said, voice steadier than I felt. They both stared, and for a moment time stretched thin. Then I turned and left. The screen door clicked behind me, and I stood under a sky so dark it felt like a void. My chest fluttered with every memory of today, the coffee mug, the receipts, the touch on her knee. I pressed my hand to my heart and whispered into the night, I'm not letting this go. And in that hush, I realized this was my first real step toward uncovering just how deep his takeover went, and making sure it stopped here. I came home that evening and found an envelope tucked under my door, stamped with no return address. My hands shook as I slid it inside and peeled it open. Inside were 2 items that made my blood run cold. Proof 1, a photograph. It showed him in my living room, standing where my late grandmother's lamp used to sit. He'd wrapped his arms around that lamp as though it were his trophy, and the photo was crisp enough to catch the gleam of his watch and the carpet fibers under his feet. The corners were dog-eared and smudged, like he'd carried it with him. I held it up under the hallway light and saw the lamp's delicate shade bent, as if he'd squeezed it too hard. My chest hitched, breath catching in my throat. I felt bile rise in my mouth as my fingers trembled on the glossy paper. Proof 2, a screenshot of a message. Below the photo was a folded slip of paper printed with a text conversation. In bold type, it read, "I had the keys copied last week. Our secret little hideaway is ready." My hands went icy as I smoothed the note flat. "Our secret little hideaway," I whispered to the empty hallway. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might fracture my ribs. He'd planned this. He'd been planning it while we ate breakfast, while my sister trusted him with her phone in her back pocket. Rage and hurt ricocheted through me, a dark pulse that made my vision burn. I sank onto the edge of the bed, cradling both proofs like they were shards of glass. My skin prickled, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I pressed my palms flat against the mattress, knuckles white, and tried to steady my breathing. But each inhale rattled through my chest, each exhale felt too short. I thought of every small moment I'd shrugged off, the way his coat hung too long on my banister, the way he'd linger in the doorway when I knew my sister was still at work. All of it clicked into place, like dominoes falling one by one. I curled into a ball, pressing my forehead to my knees, and tears burned hot behind my eyes. How could she not see? I muttered, voice ragged. A dull ache settled behind my skull, pulsing in time with the memory of his calm smile. I pictured him leaning close while my sister laughed, his sweet surprise, coffee, the casual way he'd reshuffled family photos so they faced the wall. Fury blazed in me, raw and merciless. My hands flew to my mouth to stifle a sob, but the sound slipped out anyway, quiet, broken. I rose on shaking legs and paced the small space, proofs fluttering in my grip. The lamp from the photo haunted my steps, its broken shade, the tarnished base, and I felt sick imagining him claiming it as his own. I crumpled the photo in my fist and smoothed the note flat again, fighting the urge to tear them apart. Instead, I tucked them into my pocket, close to my heart. Under the pale bulb, I dialed my friend's number without hesitation, voice tight as I rattled off what I'd found. Her soft shock on the other end offered a thread of comfort. She told me to take pictures, to back everything up, to breathe. I closed my eyes and let her words anchor me, even as my pulse thundered. When I hung up, I crept back into the hallway and pressed myself against the door, as though I could wedge a barrier between him and my home. My breath came in shallow bursts, chest rising and falling so fast I thought my lungs would burn. I pressed my ear to the wood, heart pounding against the hollow space beyond. Silence. I exhaled slowly, voice small, "I see you." My fingers curled around the proofs in my pocket, a promise forming in the storm behind my eyes. This betrayal would not go unanswered. I would gather every hidden truth, every clandestine plan, and lay it bare before my sister. I would rip down his facade, brick by brick, until he was exposed in every part of his life. My legs felt heavy as I retreated to the bedroom, placing the proofs on the nightstand like talismans of rage. I lay back, muscles trembling, and stared at the ceiling. My heart still pounded, but beneath the chaos I felt something new, a hardened resolve, a spark of cold determination. This night would pass, and with dawn, I would act. I would claim the proof of his betrayal as my weapon, and I would use it to set things right. In that tense moment in the hallway, my chest felt like it was being crushed by a silent weight. I pressed the photograph and the note into his hands, voice quivering as I forced out the words, "Explain this." His eyes flicked down to the photo first, him standing in my living room, arms wrapped around my lamp, then to the text confessing his secret copies of my keys. He blinked once, then looked up at me with that same calm smile. My hands shook so badly I thought they might drop the papers. He sighed softly, folding the photo with deliberate care before slipping it into his pocket. "You shouldn't invade my privacy," he said, voice low but mocking. My throat constricted, a hot knot tightening until every breath felt like swallowing glass. His tone was so even, so unruffled, as though he'd practiced this defense in front of a mirror. I realized then that his confidence wasn't born of innocence, it was born of control. My heart thundered, and my vision narrowed on his face, perfectly composed, eyes unreadable. And in that narrowing, I felt something shift inside me. The fear that had rattled my bones for weeks transformed into something sharper, fiercer. Rage. A cold, hard spark flared behind my ribs, and my hands went still. He took a step toward me, shoulders relaxed, as if he intended to close the distance. My palms went slick, but I didn't step back. Instead, I leaned in, letting every tremor show. "You think you can bully me into silence?" I whispered, voice raw. The hallway light flickered overhead, and I saw the barest flicker of surprise cross his face before he masked it again. He tilted his head. "I thought you'd understand," he murmured. "This is about family." The word family felt like a razor against my skin. I pressed my fingers into the photo in my hand until it crinkled. Pain shot through my knuckles, and I tasted copper on my tongue. "I am family," I said, each word a pulse of steel. "And you have no right to treat my home like your playground." My voice rose, echoing off the narrow walls. My pulse pounded in my ears, masking the faint hum of the house flexing in its frame. Heat flooded my cheeks, and my jaw locked as the memory of every empty chair, every door left ajar, every late-night creak rushed in. He stepped back, hands raised in a mock gesture of surrender. "Maybe I overstepped," he shrugged, as though admitting a trivial mistake. His casual tone felt like a slap. I could feel tears prickling hot behind my eyes, tears of fury, not sorrow. I squared my shoulders, pressing the papers flat against my chest. My breath came in hard bursts, each inhale sharper than the last. "Overstepped?" I echoed. "You broke in. You watched us. You stole our trust." My words crackled in the silence. The hallway felt smaller, darker, as if it hunched around us, leaning in to witness his unraveling. He looked at me, eyes widening just a fraction, and for a moment I saw the man I thought I knew slip away, exposed as someone who preyed on kindness. My chest tightened further, and I realized that if I didn't act now, I never would. I raised my chin. "I'm gathering everything, evidence, witnesses, the police if I have to. You'll answer for this." My voice was steadier than I felt, a strange calm settled around me like armor. He swallowed, lips parting, and I sensed his cool confidence quiver. Without another word, I turned on my heel, leaving him standing in the narrow light. Each step away was a release, as though I was shedding fear from my back. My heart still raced, but the cold spark inside me glowed stronger, something fierce and unyielding. Reaching the kitchen, I pressed my hand to the countertop, closed my eyes, and breathed out the tremor in my limbs. The hallway behind me was silent once more, but it no longer felt threatening. Now it felt like ground I'd taken back. I knew what I had to do next: build my case, gather my allies, and confront him one last time, on my terms. And I would not stop until every lie he told was laid bare and my home was safe again. My sister and I moved through the house in near silence, our steps as muted as shadows slipping across the floor. My heart hammered in my ears, like a drumbeat I couldn't turn off, and my palms felt slick against the folders and envelopes I'd shoved into my bag. Every muscle in my shoulders was taut, braced for what came next. We started in the study, where the camera had been hiding. I unzipped my bag and slid out the coil of wiring we'd snatched from behind the frame earlier. The copper strands gleamed in the dim light, twisted into a knot that felt almost alive. My fingers trembled as I straightened them, running my thumb along the sharp ends. A cold sweat prickled at the back of my neck. My sister watched me, face set in a determined line, her own hands holding a stack of glossy photos, prints of him, arms wrapped around my grandmother's lamp again, leaning close to my sister's laptop. We laid everything out on the desk: the wiring, the photos, a sheaf of printed text messages. My sister's jaw clenched when she saw the screenshot of his confession. "Our secret little hideaway is ready," and she pressed her hand to her mouth, eyes wide and wet. I reached over and clasped her wrist, feeling the rapid pulse beneath her skin. We both drew in a shaky breath, bracing ourselves. Then we went through the receipts. I rifled through a neat pile from the kitchen drawer: bills for key copies, invoices from the locksmith, even a coffee shop receipt dated well after he'd borrowed my sister's car. Each paper felt like a verdict forming in my hand. My sister sorted them into chronological order, tapping each one with a fingernail as though marking evidence on a crime scene. The bright neon slip from the 24-hour convenience store made me wince. I'd seen that foolproof tactic in horror movies: always the 24-hour store. We captured everything on my phone camera: close-ups of the tiny key stub, the ledger printout showing multiple copies made, the folded note he'd slipped under my bedroom door. My sister's breath hitched with every shutter click. I pressed my lips together, tasting grit, and forced myself to snap just one more picture. With the evidence documented, we turned to securing our home. I led the way through the hallway, each door a silent sentinel. My sister trailed behind, clutching a new set of keys we just had cut. I tested the knob on my old bedroom door: loose, easily turned, and I knew how badly he could exploit that. My hands shook as I slid the spare key into the lock and twisted it until it clicked. The bolt extended with a snap so loud it rang in the hush. I pressed my ear to the door, chest tight, listening for any echo. Silence. We repeated the ritual room by room. The guest room, he'd claimed it as his own so often I'd stopped sleeping there, received a fresh bolt. My sister tested the closet door, nodding once, then moved on. In the living room, I showed her where I'd tucked a pocket alarm under the coffee table. She winked and slipped it into her pocket. My pulse eased just a notch. Back in the hallway, I paused by the front door, hand resting on the deadbolt we'd reinforced earlier. The metal was cold under my palm, but it felt like a promise. I glanced at my sister. Her eyes were steady, shoulders squared, and I swallowed the last flicker of doubt. We gathered in the kitchen, where the light was brighter, and laid the folders on the table like a puzzle we were about to solve. My sister tapped the edge of the wiring coil. "This is our proof," she said softly, voice taut. I nodded, mouth dry. My bones felt hollow, yet I felt something fierce rise up in me, an ember glowing in the dark. "We're safe now," I whispered, though my voice cracked. She reached across and squeezed my hand. The contact was a spark of something warm: relief, solidarity, a promise that we'd done it together. My chest loosened, the drumbeat in my ears slowing. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. That night, as we lay in our respective rooms, doors locked, alarms set, I pressed the folder of proofs against my chest, feeling its reassuring weight. Outside, the world carried on, unaware of the fortress we'd built within these walls. Inside, the house felt different, ours again, reclaimed inch by inch, key by key. And as I drifted towards sleep, the ember in my chest glowed steady, whispering that the next phase of our reckoning would begin, and that we were ready. We moved through the house room by room, our footsteps hushed against the rugs as if we were undoing someone else's secrets. In the living room, my sister picked up his scattered books, titles on interior design and gardening that didn't match her taste, and stacked them neatly on the coffee table. She ran a hand through the spines, lips pressed together, and I saw the tremor in her fingers. I knelt by the sofa and unhooked his coat from the armrest, feeling the weight of every fiber that had claimed this place as his own. My palm tingled where I touched the fabric, like electricity sparking beneath my skin. We emptied drawers across the hall, revealing receipts for takeout meals we'd never ordered and cinema tickets from nights when my sister was supposed to be home. Each slip of paper felt like a confession pressed into my hand. My sister's jaw clenched as she scanned them, her shoulders rising and falling in shallow breaths. I sensed her heart pounding in her throat, matching the staccato rhythm of mine. We dropped the papers into a box marked discard, the edges of each sheet whispering against the cardboard. In the guest bedroom, he'd left his shirts hanging in my sister's closet, crisp collars and tailored cuffs that smelled faintly of his cologne. I pulled each hanger free, pausing to ball the shirt into my hand before throwing it onto the bed. The fabric felt foreign and unwelcome, and I pictured him lounging here, bending the room to his will. My scalp prickled as I dragged the bedsheets off, the mattress sighing underneath like it was relieved. My sister stripped the pillows, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. We tackled the study next, where his pens lay scattered across my old desk and his half-drunk coffee sat in my favorite mug. My stomach knotted as I tipped the mug into the sink, watching the stains spread across the porcelain. Then I gathered his pens, sleek metal barrels that clicked ominously when I clicked them, and dropped them into the same cardboard box. My sister disassembled the easel he'd brought in to work on his sketch, each plank of wood snapping apart under her hands. Dust motes drifted in the lamplight as we cleared every surface. By the time we reached the hallway closet, my legs felt wobbly, as though I'd walked across a tightrope. His shoes lined the bottom shelf, polished leather Oxfords and dusty sneakers, like silent sentinels guarding a memory. I knelt and slipped off one sneaker, the sole peeling away. I pressed the shoe into my palm, the rubber cold and yielding. My sister stood behind me, her shoulders hunched, and said softly, "We're almost there." Her voice wavered, but I heard the steel beneath it. We hauled the full boxes down to the foyer, each one thudding onto the floor like a pulse in the quiet house. My arms ached from lifting them, my back burned from bending, but when I straightened, the ache felt earned, proof of every reclaimed inch. My sister and I shared a brief, tired smile, our eyes meeting with the unspoken acknowledgement that we were stronger together. In the kitchen, we emptied the cabinets of his mugs, lipstick stains still faint on a few, and stacked them in a bag. My sister scrubbed at one stubborn mark, her knuckles widening around the sponge. I rinsed and dried the last dish, feeling water drip down my forearm. The coolness of it grounded me, reminding me that this was real work, this was our home, and we were taking it back. The house felt lighter as we worked, air sweeping through open windows, curtains fluttering like new breaths. My sister paused by the front door and placed a new welcome mat in its place. She stepped back and ran a hand along the edge, as though sealing a promise. I leaned against the doorframe, noticing how the threshold felt different now, no longer a gateway for his intrusion, but a boundary we'd redrawn with our own hands. When the last box of his things was loaded into the car, we stood in the empty living room and let the silence settle around us. The walls, stripped of his presence, seemed to breathe a quiet sigh. My sister's hand found mine, and I felt the steady beat of her pulse beneath my palm. The ache in my muscles throbbed in time with my heart. We looked at each other, exhausted but determined. The physical clutter was gone, but I sensed there was more hidden beneath these walls, secrets we hadn't yet uncovered. My sister swallowed and nodded toward the hallway frame where we'd first found that camera. "There might be one more thing," she said, voice low. My breath caught, knowing that our work wasn't finished, that one final revelation awaited us just beyond that doorway. I still remember how the hallway felt that evening, heavy, like it was holding its breath, when my sister and I paused in front of the old picture frame. We'd spent hours clearing out his things, but something in the tilt of that frame felt off. My fingers brushed its back edge almost by reflex, and the frame shifted an inch. A wire curled out, thin and black, disappearing into the wall. I froze, heart hammering so loud I thought I'd hear it echo in the empty rooms. My sister's hand found mine, squeezing until I could feel her pulse. We crouched together on the floor, breath misting in the chill that had settled behind our skin. I pressed my ear against the wall and heard nothing but the distant hum of the heater. Still, that wire felt like a pulse of someone watching. I drew in a breath so sharp it felt like glass in my lungs, then slipped a thumb under the frame's edge and pried it free. The picture clattered onto the floor, our family photo turned face down, and revealed a tiny, round lens staring back at us. My stomach lurched, cold dread pooling in my gut. I reached out, fingertips trembling, and brushed the lens. It clicked, like a trap springing. My sister gasped, a soft, shaky sound that felt like the crack of thin ice underfoot. She leaned in, eyes wide, and I saw the mirror of my own shock reflected there. For a moment, neither of us moved, only listened to our ragged breaths. Then I gently uncoiled the wire, tracing it back into the wall with slow, careful fingers. My nails scraped plaster, and the sharp scrape made me flinch. I tugged, and the camera popped free, dangling in my hand like a grotesque ornament. The tiny lens was smudged with dust and fingerprints, proof that he'd been watching us, our sisterly routines, our late-night whispers, even our tears. Anger flared so bright I felt it in my bones. I wanted to hurl the device across the room, but instead I held it tight, feeling the cold metal bite into my palm. My sister hovered beside me, voice trembling. "Why here?" she whispered. Her words hit me like a shard. He'd hidden it in the one place we'd never think to look, a frame of our own memories. I pressed my lips together, tasting bile on the back of my tongue. "So we'd never find it," I said quietly. The darkness behind those words felt thick, suffocating. We turned our attention to the wall, the spot where the wire disappeared. My sister found a small screwdriver in the utility drawer and began loosening the outlet plate nearby. I crouched on one side, holding the loose wires, heart pounding so fast I thought I'd black out. Behind the outlet, more wiring snaked into the stud, rigged with uncanny precision. It ran along the stud channel, disappearing up toward the ceiling. I caught my sister's eye and nodded. She climbed carefully onto a chair and pulled a small panel away from the ceiling corner. Her breath hitched when she saw a second camera, smaller still, its lens caught in the shadows. I felt each pulsing beat of my heart as she snapped it free, the tiny device clinking against the hardwood floor. The surreal hush that followed felt like the calm before a storm. We stared at the two cameras, the spliced wires, the way each piece clicked together like a sinister puzzle. My sister knelt and gathered both cameras in her hands, holding them as though they were live creatures. Tears pooled in her eyes, and I reached out, cradling her shoulder. We let ourselves feel the violation, raw, fierce, unforgettable. Then we slipped back into action. Methodically, we wrapped every wire, every camera, in plastic bags, sealing them like toxins. Each click of the zip felt ceremonial, a ritual burying his last invasion. We marked the bags, evidence, and placed them in our locked box alongside the photos and messages we'd collected. My hand still shook, but this time it was from a fierce clarity, a promise to ourselves that we wouldn't let this go unpunished. When everything was tucked away, we sank to the floor, backs against the wall, staring at the empty frame and bare ceiling. Silence settled around us, heavier now but somehow freeing. My sister exhaled, voice small but steady, "No more secrets." I nodded, feeling the weight in my chest ease just a fraction. In that moment, I knew the next step. With his final tools of surveillance dismantled, our reckoning would begin in earnest. We would take every piece of proof, every hidden camera, every copied key, every lie, and watch as his facade crumbled. Together, we had unearthed his darkest secrets. Now we would make him face them. Armed with our lawyer friend's advice, my sister and I settled at the kitchen table under the dim glow of the pendant light, papers strewn between us like battle plans. My pulse throbbed in my throat, and my fingertips felt tingly against the smooth surface as I opened the draft cease and desist letter he'd helped me compose. I ran a shaky thumb over the first line, "To whom it may concern," and felt a flicker of dread and determination jostle together in my chest. I cleared my throat, trying to sound calm, though my voice trembled. "So, it says here we're alleging trespass, harassment, unlawful surveillance," I trailed off, squinting at the dense legal wording. My sister leaned in, jaw set, and traced the bullet points with a fingertip. "Yeah," she said softly, "and we need to include the statutes he broke, remember?" Her voice was steady, but I saw her hand shake as she tapped the paper. I pressed my palm against my laptop's edge to ground myself. I glanced at the mug of tea cooling beside me, her herbal blend, minty and soothing, and took a sip, burning my tongue but swallowing hard. Each swallow felt like drilling a tiny stake into my resolve. I picked up my pen and added the section our lawyer friend had suggested: demand immediate cessation of contact and occupation, or face legal proceedings under the relevant privacy and property laws. My hand rattled as I wrote, and a bead of sweat slid down my temple. My sister folded her arms, eyes bright. "We should CC his landlord and HR, too," she said. I nodded, scribbling that note in the margin. My heart kicked against my ribs at the thought of unleashing this on his world, landlord, employer, neighbors. It felt both thrilling and terrifying. I leaned back, thumb brushing my cheek, and blinked against the sting of fear. "Are we ready for the fallout?" I asked, voice low. She reached across and squeezed my hand. Her grip was firm, warm, and it steadied my next breath. "We're ready," she said. "We did the work, gathered every proof, every file. This letter is the next step." I squeezed back, feeling the tremor ease out of my fingers. We sat like that for a moment, two sisters braced for war. I turned back to the laptop and formatted the letter into a clean PDF. My sister opened her email and pasted in our lawyer's contact address, then CC'd the landlord's property manager and the HR department at his company. I hovered over the send button, chest tightening until I thought I might buckle. My throat felt dry as sandpaper. My sister took a deep breath, so deep I saw her ribs shift under her shirt, and nodded. Together, we hit send. The whoosh of the email launching felt deafening in the quiet kitchen. My head buzzed, and I pressed a hand to my forehead, closing my eyes. My sister exhaled next to me, a shaky but triumphant sound. "It's done," she whispered. And then, laughter bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me, nervous, relieved, fierce. I let it out in a breathy chuckle that rattled across the table. We stared at the screen, watching the confirmation pop up, message sent. I swallowed, tasting sweat and resolve. My stomach fluttered, equal parts pride and dread. "What now?" I murmured. My sister tapped her lips thoughtfully, then said, "We wait for his response, or lack of one. And we keep documenting everything. If he steps closer, we call the police." Her words landed like a lifeline. I reached for my tea, now lukewarm, and wrapped both hands around the mug. The warmth seeped into my palms, and I realized my pulse was finally slowing. Outside, I could hear the distant hum of cars and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. The world carried on, unaware that we just struck a blow in a fight few would ever know about. We cleared the drafts off the table, stacking our evidence folders and locking them in the drawer. The act felt symbolic, like sheathing a sword until the next battle. My sister snapped the drawer closed, and the click echoed like a promise. I stood and stretched, muscles loosening from hours of tension. My back cracked softly, and I rubbed the ache between my shoulder blades. She joined me, and we stood side by side in the clearing kitchen. I blurted out, "I feel like I can breathe again." She smiled, that fierce, tender look that held both relief and readiness. "Me too," she said. Then she paused, eyes drifting to the front door. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." I nodded, chest swelling with gratitude and purpose. And in that quiet moment, as the paper lantern above us swayed ever so slightly, I knew we'd crossed an invisible line. We were no longer just defending our home, we were taking the fight into his territory. And our resolve, once a flicker of fear, burned now like a torch lighting the way forward. The next morning, sunlight slanted through the curtains in soft lines, and I woke to the steady hum of my phone's alarm. My chest still thrummed with the rush of yesterday's successes, and the apprehension of what would come next. I pushed the covers off and swung my legs to the floor, muscles stiff from the adrenaline crash. My sister's door down the hall creaked open a moment later, and she padded out in slippers, eyes bright with determination. We met in the kitchen, where the tea kettle whistled its impatient call. I dropped 2 tea bags into mugs and filled the kettle, hands surprisingly steady. My sister leaned against the counter, mug already in hand, and offered me a small, triumphant smile. "Email's been flagged," she said softly, voice low. I nodded, heart pounding at the thought of HR investigations unfolding behind closed doors. "Good," I whispered, pressing my palms to the counter. "Today we follow up." Over breakfast, whole grain toast with honey and banana slices, we mapped out our day. First, call the lawyer friend for advice on lodging a formal complaint. Second, swing by the homeowners association office to ensure the neighborhood alert thread remained pinned. Third, check our mailbox for any reaction from the landlord or postal notices. Every small step was part of a greater plan, to ensure his life unraveled at the same meticulous pace he'd tried to bend ours. I draped my coat over my shoulders and slipped on boots as my sister grabbed her bag. We crossed the foyer together, the house quiet around us, furniture in familiar places, walls freshly painted, locks secure. Even as I stepped out into the crisp morning air, I felt that coil of vigilance in my gut. My sister offered her arm, and I linked mine through hers. "Let's do this," she said, resolute. First stop, the lawyer's small brick office on Elm Street. The bell above the door jingled as we entered, and the morning light through the frosted glass lent everything a muted glow. Our lawyer friend looked up from his desk and invited us to sit. He listened as we laid out the updates. HR was engaged, evidence was filed, the landlord had no choice but to take action. He nodded thoughtfully, thumbs tapping together. "You're building a strong case," he said. "Next, you'll want to send a formal cease and desist to him, documented proof of harassment, trespass, and invasion of privacy. That letter should force his hand, either to back off or face legal consequences." My sister and I exchanged a glance, and I felt that familiar spark of power. We took notes, then shook his hand, leaving the office with a crisp template for our next move. Outside, the sun felt warmer, and the tension in my shoulders eased a fraction. We walked to the Homeowners Association building, an unassuming white clapboard house, where the board was already reviewing the community forum. The president greeted us kindly, eyebrows lifting when we confirmed our neighborhood alert. She promised to keep it pinned and send a newsletter reminder to everyone. My sister and I thanked her, feeling the safety net of our neighbors tighten around us. Our final errand was the mailbox by the corner market. My sister's fingers brushed mine as we approached the cluster of boxes. I slid open ours, and froze. A single envelope bore the landlord's logo. Hands shaking, I tore it open and read, "Notice of lease termination, effective in 30 days, due to unauthorized occupancy." My breath caught, chest tightening. She peered over my shoulder and let out a relieved laugh, equal parts joy and disbelief. We embraced on the sidewalk, laughter bubbling up like water over stones. Passers-by glanced, smiling at our odd celebration. My sister's eyes glistened. "He can't hide anywhere," she murmured. I pressed my forehead to hers. Not anymore. On the walk home, the world felt different, brighter, sharper. Each step echoed our victory. Inside the house, we placed the termination notice on the fridge with a magnet, proof that our coordinated strategy had worked. I stepped back and admired the neat kitchen, evidence folder tucked safely away, walls clear of hidden cameras, locks silent and secure. That evening, we sat on the porch with mugs of warm tea, watching the sun dip below the rooftops. The sky blazed orange and gold, a perfect backdrop to our moment of triumph. My sister leaned into me, head resting on my shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. I brushed a strand of hair from her face and smiled. We did it together. The cicadas began their steady chorus, and I felt a wave of peace roll through me. The battle had not been easy, but step by step, room by room, neighbor by neighbor, we'd reclaimed our home and our power. As night settled in, I realized that the real revenge lay not in ruin but in restoration, building something beautiful and safe from the ashes of betrayal. And in that gentle glow, I knew we would sleep at last. I settled into my sister's old armchair with my laptop balanced on my knees, the glow of the screen painting my face in pale light. My sister hovered behind me, fingers drumming against the back of the chair. We'd changed the locks, filed the cease and desist, and saw the landlord's notice. Everything was in motion. But I felt the last thread of fear tugging at me, that worry he might slip back through an unlocked window or stroll down our street unnoticed. I took a breath and opened the neighborhood forum page. I hesitated over the "New Post" button, cursor blinking. My sister leaned in, voice soft, "It's time." I clicked. My fingers hovered above the keyboard as I typed. "Heads up to everyone on Elmwood Drive. I'm one of your neighbors, and I want to warn you about a man who's been lurking around our homes, copying keys and hiding cameras. We changed our locks and filed a complaint, but please keep an eye out for anyone matching this description. Mid-30s, dark hair, calm smile. If you see him or anything suspicious, knocking when no one's home, strange wires, unfamiliar key scratches, let's alert each other immediately. Stay safe, neighbors. I reread and deleted the phrase, lurked around our homes, replacing it with, appeared near driveways. I slowed as I added, feel free to message me directly if you have tips or concerns. My sister pointed out a typo, neighbors, and I fixed it with a quick tap. Then, with a racing heart, I hit post. The confirmation banner flashed, your message is live. My pulse roared so loudly I thought everyone on the block could hear it. I closed my eyes and leaned back, letting the chair catch me. My sister exhaled next to me, relief and tension mingling in her shoulders. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with notifications. First a thumbs up emoji from Mrs. Delgado 2 doors down. Then a message, thanks for the heads up. I saw someone pacing by my car late last night. Didn't think much of it until now. My stomach clenched. Next, a comment from Raj, I found this by my back gate, tiny black wire. Didn't know what to do. Will send pic. My screen filled with photos of a loop of cable and a crushed plastic cap. Each image felt like a flash of betrayal, but also proof that our warning was working. My sister and I exchanged a look, our fear was becoming collective vigilance. We spent the next hour refreshing the page as more neighbors chimed in, reports of a man pressing his phone against windows, stories of unexpected knocks, blurry snapshots caught from doorbell cams. Each new comment washed away the isolation we'd felt, replacing it with solidarity. I felt tears prick my eyes, part relief, part gratitude. One neighbor posted a link to a local crime watch group, suggesting we share our post there too. My sister clicked to join, and I saw dozens of residents' profiles pop up, families, retirees, students, all rallying together. I posted our warning again, adding a note, let's keep each other informed. Once we're all alert, there's nowhere for him to hide. Evening deepened outside, and the street lamps flickered on. From the window, I could see my sister's house across the drive, its porch light glowing steady. It felt new, reclaimed. I closed the laptop and slid it onto the side table. The muted chatter of the forum still hummed quietly on the screen, but now it belonged to all of us. My sister stretched, rubbing her neck. I feel safer, she admitted, voice low. I nodded, fingers still warm from typing. Me too, I said. We did this. The words sounded both simple and profound, warning our neighbors, forging a network of watchful eyes. Later, I stepped outside with her, phone in hand. The night air was cool and carried the distant murmur of passing cars. I clicked through the alerts once more, each notification a small beacon, spotted near 5th and Elmwood, found more wires, 2 cars pulled into driveways, stayed too long. We walked the sidewalk slowly, lights from front porches painting pools of gold on the pavement. My sister reached for my hand, and I felt the steady beat of her trust. Back inside, we locked the front door, again, and tested the porch light. The forum thread stayed open on my laptop, a living testament to our collective vigilance. I climbed into bed with my phone tucked beside me, the final glow of the screen settling like armor across my chest. I knew the battle wasn't over, but now we had a chorus of neighbors behind us, each one watching, each one ready. And as I drifted off, I felt the last threads of fear unraveling, woven into a tapestry of community strength that no intruder could breach. We started early, when the air still held that soft hush before the day fully woke. I carried cans of primer down the hall while my sister gathered rollers and drop cloths. Our shoulders ached from the anticipation. It was the same ache you feel before a race begins. I pressed my palm against the hallway wall, feeling its rough grain under my fingers, and let out a slow breath. The woodwork gleamed fresh in places, but the paint needed our hands to make it whole again. We began in the study, where the ceiling had once harbored that hidden camera. I dipped the roller into pale gray paint and swept it across the wall in long, even strokes. Each pass covered another smudge of his presence, though I could still feel the ghost of that lens watching from behind my eyelids. My sister knelt on a drop cloth nearby, troweling spackle into a crack by the baseboard. The spackle was cool against her skin, and her jaw clenched with the effort. She rubbed at a bead of sweat sliding down her temple. "We're erasing him," she murmured, voice tight with relief and grief tangled together. I nodded, painting over a spot where I'd once discovered his coat draped like an intruder. My wrist burned from the repetitive motion, but each flick of the roller loosened a shard of fear. When the first coat dried, we moved chairs back and rolled on a second, sharper shade that felt like a promise, clean, unmarked, ours. I stepped back to inspect my work, blinking against the bright expanse, and felt a tremor of pride. Next, we tackled my old bedroom. The walls had been dulled by too many late-night fears, but now they looked crisp and clear. My sister stood in the center of the room, brush in hand, rotating as she painted. Her shirt had paint splatters on the sleeves, and I could see the tension in her shoulders melting with every stroke. I scraped off the remaining bits of wallpaper and swept the floor, my fingertips brushing at dust that clung stubbornly. Each sweep felt like clearing away more than just debris, it felt like sweeping out his lies. After walls, we moved outside. The garden, once wild under his care, had grown tangled with plants he'd insisted on. We pruned back his overgrown lavender and pulled out the weeds that had choked the rosemary. My fingers dug into moist soil, cold and rich, and I felt my pulse steady as I worked. My sister knelt beside me, pressing new seedlings into neat rows, daisies and marigolds, bright as stars against dark earth. Each plant was a heartbeat of renewal, fragile but determined. I pressed the soil around their roots with firm palms, feeling the cool earth cradle each tiny stem. When we finished planting, she handed me a watering can. I poured the water gently along the rows, listening to the soft drip-drip of liquid meeting dirt. The scent of wet soil rose around us, grounding me in the moment. My sister stood and brushed soil from her knees, hair sticking to her forehead. She inhaled deeply, eyes closed. "This is ours again," she said, voice steady but soft. My chest tightened at the sound of her conviction. Back inside, we replaced door hardware, sleek new handles in brushed steel. My sister tightened screws while I tested each latch. The metal felt cool and resolute in my hand. When every door clicked closed with a firm turn, I felt a thrill of victory. Each lock was a boundary we'd drawn, a line he could no longer cross. We finished the day in the living room, arranging new throw pillows on the sofa, soft blues and creams that brightened every corner. I fluffed the cushions until they held their shape, and my sister draped a fresh blanket over the armrest. She stepped back, arms crossed, and surveyed the space. The sunlight slanted through the window, painting golden rectangles on the floor. The room breathed with a lightness it hadn't known since before he arrived. I sank onto the sofa and let out a long sigh. My muscles ached in a good way, as though they'd done honest work. My sister joined me, and we sat shoulder to shoulder, hands brushing. Silence passed, comfortable and full. Then she leaned her head against mine and whispered, "We did this." My chest swelled with an ache that was both tender and fierce. Outside, the wind rustled through the newly planted flowers, and I realized how alive everything felt. Walls, locks, plants, pillows, all stitched together by our resolve. We'd rebuilt more than rooms, we'd rebuilt our sense of safety and ownership, stroke by careful stroke. And as the afternoon light softened into evening, I understood that this home, now truly ours, would hold only the stories we chose to plant and paint into its walls. That evening, the sky had softened into a muted purple when my sister and I stepped out into the backyard, our bare feet sinking into the cool grass. The string lights overhead glowed like fireflies caught in a gentle net, each bulb casting a warm pool of light across the freshly planted lavender and rosemary. I could feel the tension in my shoulders untangling itself, knot by knot, as I inhaled that familiar herbal scent, sweet and soothing, like a promise of renewal. We carried 2 steaming mugs of chamomile tea, her favorite blend with a hint of honey, out to the wooden bench we'd rescued from the corner of the garage. The wood was smooth and worn, but sturdy under our weight. I wrapped both hands around my mug, feeling the warmth seep into my palms, and let out a breath so slow it felt like the first one I'd taken in weeks. My sister slid onto the bench beside me, her knees brushing mine, and tucked her mug between her palms as if it were a talisman against the past. For a long moment, we said nothing. The only sound was the soft hum of cicadas in the trees and the gentle drip of the watering can she'd left by the edge of the garden path. I traced a finger along the rim of my mug, eyes drifting upward to the lights draped between the oak limbs. They swayed slightly in the breeze, as if applauding our efforts. My heart felt heavy with everything we'd endured, but under that glow, it also felt unburdened, like a door had closed on the worst of it. I almost forgot what quiet could feel like, my sister murmured, voice low. She looked sideways at me, and I saw her jaw unclench for the first time in what felt like forever. Her shoulders had settled, no longer braced for an ambush. I met her gaze and offered a small, relieved smile. Me too, I admitted. It's weird, nice, but weird. She laughed softly, a sound that rippled through the garden like a breeze stirring petals. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, she said, eyes narrowing back toward the house as if expecting to catch a shadow slipping by the window. Her hand trembled slightly as she tipped her head back to look at the lights. But it hasn't. I reached out and covered her hand, pressing my thumb against her knuckles. It's okay to let this be okay, I said, voice gentle. The words felt clumsy, but they were true. She turned her palm up, letting me hold it, and laced her fingers through mine. I could feel her pulse slowing, syncing with mine, and that steady thump felt like a chant. We were safe, together, here. A moth flickered near one bulb, its wings brushing the light and casting tiny shadows on the grass. My skin prickled, but not with fear, more like awareness, a reminder of how alive everything was. I watched it for a moment, then looked back at my sister. Remember when we used to camp out here as kids? I asked, voice soft. We'd lie under the open sky and whisper secrets until we fell asleep. My lips curved at the memory. She smiled, eyes shining. Yeah, and we thought we were invincible, she said, the laughter in her voice bittersweet. Nothing could touch us in our little fort. She paused, then squeezed my hand. Maybe we're stronger now, because we know how to rebuild when things break. I nodded, heart swelling at her words. The tea had gone lukewarm, but neither of us cared. I looked at the lavender lining the path, those tiny purple buds nodding in the light, and thought about how fragile they'd seemed when we first planted them. Now they stood tall, like sentries guarding our sanctuary. The rosemary's prickly leaves brushed my arm when I shifted, and the scent made me inhale deep, as if breathing in courage. A distant car rolled by, headlights flashing along the fence. I felt a flicker of the old vigilance, but it passed like a wisp of smoke. I pressed my mug to my lips and took a sip, tasting honey and calm. My sister leaned her head on my shoulder, and I rested mine against hers, feeling the warmth of her hair against my cheek. The lights above us pulsed softly, echoing our quiet exhale. We stayed there, side by side, until the moon rose pale and high, casting silver ribbons across the lawn. In that gentle half-light, the world felt whole again, our home no longer a battleground but a haven we'd stitched back together, piece by careful piece. And as sleep tugged at my lids, I realized that revenge, for all its fire, had led us here, to this moment of fragile peace, under a canopy of light, hearts at rest. That night, I lay awake on the couch in the living room, listening to the low buzz of the string lights and the distant hum of late traffic. My sister slept on the floor beside me, curled into a tight ball with the new quilt pulled up to her chin. The house was finally still, ours again, but my chest tightened as memories flickered in the dark. I rubbed my palms on my jeans, feeling the rough denim's promise of safety. I shifted so I could see the hallway, its walls freshly painted, stakes and twine marking the garden's edge visible through the front window. Every detail felt like proof that we'd won, but I couldn't shake the ache that had settled under my ribs. I pressed my hand to the curve of my waist, remembering how long I'd felt hollow there. That emptiness had been filled now, with anger, determination, and the steady pulse of sisterhood. My sister stirred, eyelids fluttering open. I offered a soft smile, though my voice came out as a whisper, "You awake?" She blinked twice, then shook her head. "Too much on my mind," she admitted. Her jaw clenched as she pushed herself up, stretching limbs stiff from the floor. I reached out, helping her to a sitting position. "Can't switch off," she said, voice rough. I nodded, knowing exactly how she felt. We sat side by side, shoulders touching, and I slipped my hand around hers. Her skin was cool, fingers tucked into mine. "We did it," I whispered. My words echoed in the hush. She closed her eyes and leaned onto my shoulder. "I keep expecting him to slip back in," she confessed. My stomach clenched, a reflex I recognized all too well. But then I squeezed her hand, the single pulse of blood through my thumb steady. "Not tonight," I said. We stayed like that until the first light of dawn crept through the curtains. The world outside began to stir, birds called shy trills, a neighbor's garage door rumbled open, but inside, time felt suspended. We didn't talk, there was nothing left to say. Our silence was a vow. Later, when morning truly arrived, we moved through the house again, room by room, but this time without tools or evidence. We simply touched the walls, tested the new locks, opened windows to let in fresh air. In the kitchen, I brewed herbal tea while she set out 2 mismatched mugs. Steam curled up between us like a benediction. We toasted to small victories. I caught her eye just as she lifted her mug, and we both laughed, a soft, shared sound that felt like water over cracked stone, smoothing rough edges. My chest fluttered with relief, a lightness I thought I'd forgotten I could carry. After breakfast, we stepped outside. The garden greeted us with lavender tips trembling in the breeze, rosemary standing watch, and wild poppies peeking through the border we'd sown. My sister brushed a hand over the lavender, inhaling that sweet, protective scent. "It's ours now," she said, voice certain. I nodded and knelt to the soil, stroking at a cluster of rosemary sprigs. "We grew this," I said, meaning more than plants. We spent the afternoon planting daisies along the patio edge, bright circles of white and gold that would open wide in the sun. My sister's hands were sure now, steady as she pressed each seedling into place. I worked beside her, feeling the rhythm of our shared effort. Every handful of dirt felt like an affirmation, we could still build beauty after betrayal. As evening fell, we strung paper lanterns along the fence and turned them on. The yard glowed with a soft, hopeful light. We stood in the middle of it, arms wrapped around each other's waists, and watched shadows dance. The air smelled of lavender and earth and something I could only name as freedom. My sister rested her head against my shoulder and murmured, "Thank you." I tilted my chin down and pressed my lips to the top of her head. "Thank you," I replied. For trust, for courage, for every quiet step we'd taken together. In that glowing garden, under the watchful oak and the vigil of our new seedlings, I realized that revenge had come not from confrontation or fury, but from reclaiming our lives piece by piece. He'd tried to own our home, our trust, our hearts, and we'd taken it all back. The hope that stirred in my chest now was real and hand-built, like the fence we'd repaired, like the walls we'd repainted, like the lavender we'd planted. That night, we closed the back door together, the click of the latch a final seal on his chapter and an opening on ours. Inside, our home stood quiet and solid, ours in every fiber. And out in the garden, the lanterns shimmered, gentle witnesses to 2 sisters who had faced darkness and found their own light. The following morning, we moved through the house together, the soft dawn light filtering through gauzy curtains and painting gentle patterns on the polished floors. My sister paused at the front door, slipping her hand onto the deadbolt we'd reinforced, and turned it with a quiet click. I watched the bolt extend fully, sealing out the memories of what had been. She looked back at me, a small, weary smile lifting the corners of her mouth, and I felt a rush of relief that settled like warm sunlight in my chest. We traced our fingers along the newly painted walls as we passed, from the hallway, where the pale gray still wore the sheen of fresh primer, to the study where every brushstroke bore witness to our reclaiming of space. My palm pressed into the smooth surface, and I closed my eyes for a moment, inhaling the faint scent of paint and spackle. The walls felt different now, no longer thresholds for intrusion, but guardians of the life we'd rebuilt. In the living room, I tested the lock on my old bedroom door, the one I'd avoided using until now. The key turned without resistance, the bolt sliding firmly into place. I pressed my ear to the door, half hoping to hear silence answer back, and then pushed gently. Nothing budged. Safe. I opened the door and stood inside, letting the morning light bathe me. The room was bare except for the bed and the new rug my sister had bought, soft cream fibers that swallowed sound. I stretched, pressing my palms to the wall, feeling the neat expanse under my fingertips. She joined me there, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Feels like home," she said, voice hushed but steady. I nodded and ran my hand along the window frame, where the latch clicked shut as I tested it. Outside, I could see the garden in muted detail, the lavender tips nodding in the breeze, the paper lanterns swaying gently. It was ours now, beyond question. We moved into the kitchen next, where the cabinets had been refitted and the hardware glinted new. My sister opened each door, one by one, and then closed them firmly, as though affirming our ownership. I ran my finger along the edge of the countertop, a smooth line of stone that felt cool beneath my skin, and glanced at the drawer where we'd locked away the evidence. The small key hung on my ring, a reminder of how far we'd come. At the dining table, we sat across from each other, mugs of tea steaming between us. I lifted mine and took a slow sip, tasting the warmth and peace in every swallow. My sister mirrored me, and we held each other's gaze for a beat, savoring the shared triumph. No words were necessary, our silence brimmed with understanding. Later, we stepped upstairs, each floorboard underfoot a memory we'd reclaimed. In the guest room, we tested the closet door, ensuring the bolt held fast. I peeked around the hallway corner to the bathroom, where the tiles gleamed under the morning light and the shower door sealed with a satisfying click. Every latch, every lock, every painted surface was a stitch in the new tapestry of our lives. At the top of the stairs, I paused, pressing my palm to the banister. I could feel the faint groove where his jacket had once brushed against the wood, a ghostly trace that now felt like a scar we'd healed. My sister stood beside me, breath soft, and slipped her hand into mine. We breathed in unison, a steady rhythm that echoed our shared resilience. In the hallway, we planted a small houseplant on the narrow console table, a bright green fern in a simple pot. My sister nudged it into place and stepped back, nodding with satisfaction. "New life," she said simply. I smiled and dusted off my palms, the fine grit of potting soil a comforting sensation. We returned to the first floor and opened the front door together, stepping onto the porch. The cool morning air brushed our faces, carrying the soft chorus of birdsong. I closed the door behind us with a firm push, hearing the latch settle into place as though exhaling a long-held breath. My sister slung her arm around my shoulders, and I leaned into her warmth. The street stretched out before us, quiet, familiar, unthreatening. I looked at the glowing windows of our home, each pane reflecting the early light, and felt a surge of gratitude. We'd taken back every room, every wall, every lock, and in doing so, we'd reclaimed our sense of safety and belonging. My sister squeezed my hand and whispered, "We're home." I pressed my cheek to her hair and nodded, the weight of our victory settling into my bones. As we stepped off the porch and onto the path toward wherever the day would lead us, I realized that this moment, testing locks, touching walls, closing doors, was more than a routine check. It was the final seal on the chapter of betrayal and the first step into a future built on our own terms. And in that still, golden morning, our sanctuary stood whole and unshakable at last. I woke to the soft whisper of dawn slipping through the curtains, the sky outside turning from bruised indigo to pale gold. My sister was already up, standing barefoot in the kitchen doorway, holding 2 mugs of steaming tea, her herbal blend, citrusy and light. I wrapped my fingers around the mug she handed me, feeling the warmth seep into my skin, and leaned against the counter, shoulders still tight with the day's anticipation. We slipped outside together, stepping onto the dewy grass that shimmered in the early light. Lavender and rosemary swayed gently in the breeze we'd coaxed into shape, their slender stalks tipped with violet and green. I inhaled deeply, tasting mint and earth, and let the serenity wash over me. The garden felt alive, every petal, every needle of rosemary, standing guard over our reclaimed space. My sister set her mug on the bench we'd placed beneath the oak tree, its branches stretching overhead like protective arms. She sank onto the weathered wood, eyes closed as she savored the moment. I watched her chest rise and fall, steady and calm, and realized how far we'd come, from disbelief to defiance, fear to this fragile peace. I joined her, sitting close so our knees touched, and let the silence speak for both of us. A robin hopped across the path, tilting its head, and I felt a smile tug at my lips. My heart, still bruised from weeks of tension, felt lighter, almost buoyant. I traced a finger along the edge of the mug, listening to the faint drip of condensation, and thought about all the morning coffees he'd poured for my sister without a second thought, and how each had poisoned the safety of our home. Now, every sunrise tasted of renewal, not of danger. We sat wordless for a long beat, and then my sister cracked her eyes open and nudged a lavender stalk with her toe. "It feels like a promise," she said softly. I turned to her, eyebrows lifting. "A promise?" She nodded, watching dew clinging to the buds. "That no matter what comes next, we can rebuild, together." Her voice trembled just a little, but it was steady, true. I let that promise settle inside me, a warm ember bright against the cool dawn. "Together," I agreed, pressing my mug to my lips and sipping. The tea was smooth, sunlight in liquid form. I closed my eyes, feeling it chase away the last threads of worry knotted in my chest. Behind us, the house stood silent, its windows reflecting the morning glow. Walls we'd painted, locks we'd changed, shadows we'd banished, all bore witness to our journey. I thought of every room stripped of his lies, every seed we'd pressed into the soil in defiance of his trespass. And now, here at the threshold of day, I understood that revenge wasn't about retribution, it was about restoration. My sister leaned her head on my shoulder, and I draped an arm around her. "Thank you," she murmured, voice so quiet I almost missed it. I kissed the top of her head, tasting lavender on the breeze. "Thank you," I echoed, because it was true, for her courage, for her trust, for every step she took by my side. A breeze stirred the rosemary, carrying its sharp scent to my nostrils. I breathed it in, feeling a fierce clarity sharpen inside me. The past weeks had been a storm, and we'd weathered every squall. Now, in this gentle calm, I felt rooted like those plants beneath my feet, steady, resilient, alive. The robins sang a clear, bright note, and I felt my pulse sink to its song, soft, hopeful. My sister stood, brushing grass from her leggings, and held out a hand. I took it, rising beside her, and together we walked back toward the house. Each step felt intentional, a deliberate reclaiming of every foot of our land. At the back door, she paused and turned to me, eyes reflecting the tender light. "This ending," she said, "is just the beginning, huh?" I nodded, heart swelling. "Yeah," I whispered. "Our beginning." We stepped inside, closing the door on the garden of lavender and rosemary, the lanterns, and the bench that bore our quiet ceremony. The house greeted us with familiar creaks, but they felt like greetings now, not warnings. I placed my mug on the counter and ran my fingers over the smooth wood, our wood, reclaimed. In that gentle hush, I realized we'd won more than safety. We'd sculpted a new story, one of unity, resilience, and hard-won peace. And as the first full sunlight spilled across the floor, I knew we would carry this dawn in our hearts always, a promise of renewal, a testament to our unbreakable bond, and the first chapter of the life we chose to build, hand in hand, at last free.